Hello and welcome to this very special edition of our OmniTalk Spotlight series, where we, Chris, are bringing interviews with our top 20 OmniStars for 2022. This award was developed in partnership with Corso to recognize the top omnichannel operators based on the headlines and the work that they are driving within their respective organizations. I'm Ann Mazenga.
And I'm Chris Walton.
And we are pleased to welcome to the show today Dilip Kumar, the now Vice President of Amazon Web Services and the former VP of Amazon Physical Retail and Technology. Dilip, welcome to OmniTalk. Thanks for joining us today. This is a huge moment for us to have you on the show. We're really excited to be honoring you today with this award.
Well, thank you for having me. First of all, I've been sort of huge fanboys of what you all have been doing for a very long time.
No way.
So first of all, the recognition for the top 20 OmniStars, I'm in very good company there. So I feel humbled and I sincerely appreciate it. But more importantly, you two are doing stellar work, bringing all kinds of things at very easy access and fingertips. So please continue doing what you're doing.
Thanks, man. Wow, that's a hell of an endorsement right out of the get-go, Ann.
Thank
you so much, Dilip.
You've been keeping us busy too.
Yes,
I have to say,
yes.
We have a pretty much weekly slot in the Fast Five these days. It feels like for all of the things that you've been up to the past few years.
Yeah, so. And I think, as you know, I'm probably the biggest Just Walk Out technology fan out there. I'm probably like a fanboy myself of you, right back at you. But yeah, man, we're excited to get to it. Let's I can't wait to talk to you and get the inside scoop on everything that you've been doing over the last year and how you think about this omni-channel question too, which is why we developed the award that we did to recognize the true omni-channel operators out there in the marketplace versus those people that are just maybe, talking about it, so to speak.
100%.
But before we get started, we want to give a special shout out to our partners at Corso, without whose support OmniStars would not have been possible. Yes. Corso is a tool your field leaders will actually thank you for. It turns all their reports into personalized top priorities, then helps them take the right actions to boost performance. Learn how leaders at over 25,000 US stores are saving time and driving impact at corso.com.
All right, Dilip, let's get the background.
Yes, got to get your background.
Who is Dilip Kumar? Tell us about the origin story, and really, but just your background and career. We love to hear a little bit more about you first before we dig into all the reasons that we wanted to give you this award.
Well, I've been at Amazon for just a little over 19 years and change. The Amazon is, as you know, in 2000, I joined in July 2003. It was a very different company. Back then, there was no web services, no digital, no fulfillment by Amazon, no advertising. It was a very, very different company. And I've been fortunate to see the evolution of what this company has been from when I started to where it is. Right now, I am the VP in AWS Applications organization. It's a new organization that's created in AWS. I moved with several of my prior teams that I was working with in physical retail, which Just Walk Out, the Amazon Dash Cart, Amazon One, and a bunch of other services that we had built for our first party stores that we're now slowly but surely also offering to a lot of third parties and getting a lot of traction. So the AWS applications move was to be able to say that, well, while AWS is known traditionally for a lot of infrastructure services, there's a bunch of things that we're also doing very higher up in the stack, like the ones that we just mentioned, like Just Walk Out, Amazon One, where it's turnkey solutions that we're offering to retailers, but also there's many other parts of AWS applications like Amazon Connect, which is our call center in the cloud, or our productivity applications, which allows people to be able to get a desktop, or productivity applications directly managed through AWS services, and a bunch of other things that we're working on. So it's a super exciting stage for us in AWS, as well as the evolution of all the things that we worked on to see, where we can make this for third parties.
Yeah, that makes sense. So it's like I surmised without having talked to you. So what we saw the announcement about, using the Just Walk Out platform to inform CPGs of how their products are selling in, say, an Amazon Fresh store. That's kind of the idea here, is to help build out those solutions and have you spearhead the further use of the technology in new ways. Is that right?
Yeah. And so one of the things that we noticed, we started off with retail. We started off with our first party stores, but as you've seen, a lot of our third party stuff has gone well beyond retail. So if you look at Amazon One, you look at Just Walk Out. the diversity of where it is being applied to, like stadiums or convention centers or places in the airport, extend far beyond just street front retail. And
Yes.
street front retail is also going to be super important. It's going to be a very core vertical, but there's many other verticals where there's applicability. And I think in all of these, the common point is: are people time pressed? Do they crave convenience in places they've been? And in all of these areas, there's a massive amount of throughput that these stores get in a very short period of time. People don't want to miss out on whatever the activity that they're doing. You don't want to miss out on any action in a ball game, or especially at the airport. And so in all of these things, a common theme of providing convenience rings true. And I love the fact that there is much broader applicability beyond just what we originally started with, which is our first party stores and convenience, and then now in grocery.
Right. Yeah. And to that point, we were just in the Chicago Midway store like 2 weeks ago. We put a video out of that experience, walking in, buying a bottle of water in like 20 seconds. It was like the cleanest thing ever.
Yeah.
All right. Well, let's get to the nuts and bolts of this. Like, just walk out technology. I think we have to talk about it. Of all the things that, we've noticed in the past, few years, it's quite frankly, I already called it on Forbes, the most significant innovation in retail of the next 30 years already. And I really believe that. So talk to us tell the audience, give them a real sense. And I know you've done this before, but I think it's important to do it again. Give them a sense of all that entails. Like, how did it start? Where is it now? And what can you tell us as much as you can about where it's going next?
Yeah. So, when we started circa, I want to say Jan 2013, there was this hypothesis.
Was that long ago?
Yeah, I mean, it was okay. It took a while to be able to build it. There's, as you know, we started off with this hypothesis that physical retail is very well served. This was in conjunction with our physical retail approach. And it's like, we wanted to do something in physical retail right around that time. There was a strong belief that our brand would translate to it, that there was actually value there. But the idea was that physical retail is very well served. As you know, there's a lot of choices, a lot of options, a lot of formats for customers. And so the last thing that we wanted to do was to come up with another Me Too offering, because that wasn't really going to be useful for the customer. It wasn't really going to be useful that we can offer in any differentiated way. So that was the genesis of it. But then we started thinking about, well, what makes sense? Amazon is sort of built on this principle of price, selection, and convenience. When you go from an online world to a physical world, you're effectively reducing your selection to a certain degree. You go from an unconstrained selection to a slightly more constrained selection, depending on the size and the format of the store. Price is still relevant. Just because you're in an offline environment and your cost structure might be different than an online, or vice versa. Your customers don't want to pay more for your cost structure. So like, price is extremely relevant, both whether it's online or offline.
Yeah.
The thing that we kept coming back to is, what is our core value proposition for convenience? And the thing that we kept coming back to again and again from our own experiences as customers is that people didn't like waiting in lines. It was not a very productive use of their time. But you also looked at it to say that when you think about price, you think about low prices. Why is low prices important? Because 5 years from now, it's unlikely that any of us would want to pay more for something than less. So like, low prices is a very durable tenet that you could build something off of. Very similar to that for convenience. Waiting in lines, like 5 years from now, 10 minutes from now, like 2 years from now, you're not more likely to want to wait in line than you are today. So we felt that that was sort of going to be the core of what we wanted to do. And then we sort of worked back from, well, if you don't want to wait in line, what are some of the ways that we can improve that experience? And one way of improve that experience is to say that if we didn't have people wait, and the most non-productive use of their time is just waiting in line to pay. And there have been many things that have happened so far. There's been innovations to be able to improve the speed of those transactions by 20 minutes or like 20 seconds or like 5 seconds. And all of those have been important, but nothing ever went to this bar to say, what if it didn't exist?
Right.
What if you could sort of move off of that? Because a 10% improvement or 20% improvement in what people have been traditionally doing in waiting in line and point of sales and other would have been okay, but it's not a game changer in any shape or form. It is not highly differentiated. So that was the genesis of it. And then sort of started the work back on how to do.
That's really interesting. I want to hear that too, but I just want to key in on something that you said, because I think it's really important for the audience to hear. So what you're saying, because I didn't know this, what you're saying is the idea was rooted in kind of the typical Amazon flywheel of selection, price, and convenience. Selection is going to be a challenge in the physical world. So you got to have to nail price. You're going to have to keep that consistent, and you're really going to lever up the convenience side of that in this play. And that's how it originated. Is that
it was our spin on what constitutes convenience.
Okay.
In the physical world. If you think about your physical shopping experiences, tons of things have changed, right? It's not as if that world is static by any means. Like for people who are sort of in the know, formats grow and increase, they change, they come in and out of place. So it's not as if that formats are always, they're persistent throughout history. The size of stores change, the selection in them constantly changes, the point of sale innovation, self-checkout has happened. There's a bunch of things that have happened. But by and large, the entire shopping experience has always remained the same. You come in, you walk around.
Yes,
you
it's like 1916.
Yeah, wait in line, you pay, you leave, right? Some things have always been held as things that are inviolable or they cannot be changed. And so we started off with, well, if we wanted to do something for convenience, and this isn't convenience where only a small select group of people would be subject to that. So there's a lot of work that happened in ML and AI where they're like, oh, the small section of the store is highly ML powered, so you can know exactly where the origin story of where the apple came from and the amount of
yeah.
But the
very valuable
experience is untouched. But if you really want to believe in convenience, if you really want to impact as many people who are shopping in the store with this, you have to build something that is foundational to the entire experience.
Well,
that's what this was.
That's a really important thing too, Dilip, that I think is a reason why, Chris, we chose Dilip as one of the omni-channel, like OmniStars, because I feel like it's just how you approach. When you started telling us about how you created the Just Walk Out technology, it was like, we can't just go into retail the way that every other person does. We can't just make an Amazon store. We have to be solving a problem. We have to be changing the way that we're approaching things. And that is so vital, I think, to how retailers listening to this podcast need to be thinking about things. You can't just go in. You have to figure out what the problem is that you can uniquely solve as a company,
especially for disruptive innovation.
Yes.
Too. And so Dilip, okay, so that's the origin story. So then talk about the middle and then the next too. I want to hear that as well.
Well, the middle and the next is not. This is where step one is the origin story. Step three is sort of everything is out there. But then step
right.
two,
Yeah, it's kind of never-ending story, right?
Step two, you live and die in step two. And step two was all about for us to be able to try to figure out, how to make this work. And we had many hypotheses on there's many different ways to be able to try to do this. Or you could give everybody a phone and they could just scan the item. And this is why there's a lot of scan and go and other kinds of approaches that are very similar to that. It's very simple, it's very easy. But then you start thinking about these things as there's parents and with kids shopping in there, they don't really have phones, they go in different directions. And so suddenly ideas that seemed reasonable at first blush sort of tend to fall. And so we went through many different paths, but we sort of distilled it to a very simple thing to say that, we have to be able to figure out who took what. At the end of the day, if you can figure out who took what, and you can do it across all the people who are shopping in the store, you'll be able to send them a receipt, when they leave. So the idea of who took what, then the question is that, what foundational elements can you use to be able to do that? So you need to know. Computer vision at that time, machine learning at that time was sort of, Amazon's been using machine learning for a very long time, even before it was in vogue, personalization and a variety.
Before it was an acronym.
You need a t-shirt. You need a t-shirt that says I was using ML before it was cool.
Yeah, exactly. But then there were core sets of initiatives going across in Amazon. We had a whole effort going on voice, which resulted in what Alexa is, and many years later. But then there was also the idea was that computer vision is going to be a very foundational and a core technology for us to build on, because we believe that computational capacity is going to drastically increase. The algorithms are going to get a lot more sophisticated. So even though it didn't quite exist, there was a strong hypothesis, just proven true, that the ability for the technologies to be able to do the kinds of things that we wanted to do are going to happen. It didn't really exist. So we had to push the boundaries of what needed to exist. Remember, we're trying to build a transactional level system here. If you look at the order pipeline, you look at the order pipeline of most companies, there's a lot of ML that happens before figuring out what to offer customers. There's a lot of ML that happens post-processing, but in the core order pipeline, it's just straight. It's just transactions. There's not a lot of ML. You're not. No, there's no guessing. The customers are clicking what they want to add to their cart. Here, you have to infer what they're adding to their cart by building algorithms. So it's several orders of magnitude more complex than a traditional ordering system. Even simple things that you sort of get the benefit for even in Amazon, from the time that you place an order to when the item ships, there's some amount of time. But in a physical store environment, all of that needs to happen very synchronously. Like you need to know exactly about their payment instrument. You need to know whether the credit card is going to work. You need to know all of that stuff. All of those things that you have oodles of time in traditional shopping gets constrained, and you have to do it in almost near real time. So there's tons of complexity, not just on the ML and CV side, but also on the orchestration and infrastructure side. Like your algorithms don't really get a chance if you don't have the right sensors. Your sensors don't really give a chance if you don't have control over the network. So we have to build all of that.
Right.
Yeah. Well, Dilip, you're giving us some examples, but I really like to go in even deeper and get a sense of what you've learned, like since when we're talking about bringing innovation to the market. Like, what have you learned, especially about physical store innovation versus digital only innovation, and the kind of elements that need to be in the right spots for that to work successfully?
Yeah. It's a super interesting question, and if you think about yourself as customers, you don't think about physical versus digital. You just think about, I'm here for a purpose.
Yes.
Can I solve my purpose without me fighting through whatever technology that somebody has decided to throw in my way in order for me to accomplish my task? If you're there to get a sandwich and a drink, you want to get a sandwich and a drink, and you want to be gone as early as you want to take your time, and you want to linger, and you want to get a lot of information, you should feel free to be able to do that. So I think the thing that clicked for us was that customers don't think about physical environments and digital environments. They just think about missions that they're on, and they think about convenience. And a good asset test for that is that was it seamless enough for them? Was it simple enough for them that it didn't require them to sort of learn a new way to be able to shop, even if it was a new way to shop? And then are they eager to try it again? Which are all sort of signs of something that you have a winner on your hands. And you have to do that time and time and time again, because you don't take this for granted, because customers have choices. There's plenty of options. So you step out of your office, there's plenty of choices for where you can go and eat. So you have to provide, like, this is why there's a considerable amount of, the reason I love working with other retailers as well as for third parties is they've perfected the art of knowing, from a selection and a merchandising standpoint of what's selling and what isn't selling. And there's still improvements there, but they've done all of that. So the value that we're providing to them is that, like, we know that when customers will come into your stores, that they will find what they're looking for, and that their trip mission is not going to be, a disappointment. So the value that we can add is that how do we make that even more convenient? So I think physical retailers had to get, digitally very savvy, not just because of the pandemic, but the pandemic exacerbated a lot of these things. But it also worked the other ways to say that, like, what are some of the things that we need to do that brings a lot of that digital innovation in physical environments without making people think that they have to, the less you and I have to think about what it is that we are doing, you almost operate like you don't think about the route you specifically took to go home.
Absolutely.
But you go home every day because you just go on autopilot. It's what we want people to be doing, to be immersed in what they're shopping for, versus worrying about anything else. And I think that's a hard thing. It's a very hard balance to achieve.
It is, and it is. I love that we're going down this road too, because I want to ask you, because I getting the chance to talk to you today. It makes me think too, like, one of the things that Anna and I have talked about on our podcast and struggled with understanding, and we're going to geek out here intentionally for the audience, but is the app scan to enter the store, to that point that you were making. And honestly, we don't know which way we come down on it yet. And so I'm curious, especially as you're working with third parties, you're doing the experimentation on your own. There's hybrid approaches. There's the acquiring the app scan. There's the palm scan. There's the credit card scan. Like, how did you and are you continuing to sort through that in terms of finding that right answer? And the other question I have is, ultimately, does it matter too? Because I feel like once you use it, you said the repeat behavior. Once you use it, it's pretty damn easy to understand it, and I think people probably do it again over and over again. At least that's my hunch. Yeah. But a lot there. I know I just said it. I was kind of speaking off the top of my head, but a lot of thoughts in my head. But I'm curious, how would you think about what I'm asking?
Yeah, when we first started with our first party stores, we were we had the benefit of being in locations in corporate environments and very close to a lot of places. Our first store was on the first floor of one of our office buildings.
Yeah, right. In Seattle. Yeah.
Everybody around at the Amazon app. Yeah. But we had a separate Go app as well, and we were in beta for a while. And so our first foray into this is to say that, well, people know how to use an app. There is a reasonably large install base for this. So we should be able to put this in the app, because we were trying to do specific things like give receipts in the app. There's a bunch of other things that we were trying to put in the app. So we said, the app is a perfect vehicle to be able to deliver this. And it didn't take long. People still took a little bit of time to be able to figure out, well, you still have to download the app. You have to get it ready. You have to have that. You have to have your credit card set up with it. So there is that initial hurdle. When we went to third parties, you realize that you're in environments where we're in retailers where some of them had their own app, some of them didn't.
Some don't.
Like it's so when you go to when you went to a store in the airport, it wasn't as if that there was a retailer specific app there.
No, there
so
wasn't.
The most natural thing that sort of occurred to us is this is where we had credit card be the form of entry for third party locations. Even before Amazon One, we had credit card there. In fact, credit card was sort of offered as a way of entry for all third parties, even before it was in our first party stores, largely because our first party stores, originally we had said that, based on where we were, there was a huge app install base. And so now we see that there's a combination of people who use the app, people who use the credit card. And then when Amazon One came, we said that, well, you're using this, why not you use Amazon One instead? And it turns out that once people use Amazon One, more than 90% of them don't go back.
Oh yeah,
no
for
way.
Sure.
Yeah,
that's good to know, though. I didn't know that for sure.
And it wasn't a number that we started with. It wasn't a number that we were even sort of it was just an interesting data point for us, is that once people use it, they realize how convenient it is, and then they don't switch to, even though they have a credit card on them, even though they have the app on them, they just find this a lot more convenient. So I think our approach with that is to offer people enough choices depending on how they want to shop and where they want to shop. And with things like Amazon One, once you've sort of signed up for it, in a particular, it just works in other locations. So you just don't have to do that sign up per retailer or any of those other kinds of things. So we just take care of all of that, behind the scenes.
Got it. So I'm curious. So I want to ask you again. I want to ask the question a different way that Ann asked too, which is are there any because you've been at Amazon for a long time. You've done innovation that's purely digital focused. You're now doing innovation that's purely physical focused. Are there lessons that you would learn or tell other people to help them navigate that climate? Or is that question a question? And I want you to be honest with me, or is that question a question that sounds smart, but really is kind of dumb if you get down to the core of what innovation is all about?
No, I don't think it's a dumb question at all. And in fact, I'm not even sure that the answers that I'm going to give you are they are what worked for us. The applicability of it for working for other people, I don't know. But in no particular order, I think one of the things that we have always seen when it comes to any innovation in general is that you do require sufficient diversity of thought among the team. Mm-hmm. And I think teams get incredibly homogenous in terms of either the groups of people. So I'll give you specific examples of this. Mm-hmm. So one is when we were trying to build this for physical stores, and we were trying to sort of put this technology in physical stores, we paired people. There were people who came from construction and design backgrounds, who had a lot of tons of background in building physical retail. And then we had a bunch of people at Amazon who had tons of background in machine learning and in software engineering and hardware engineering and a variety of other disciplines. But it's remarkable how each side had virtually no appreciation or understanding of the other side's sets of problems.
Right.
Like
right.
you'd have engineers come in and they'd be like, well, if that wall wasn't, if that sort of
Right.
pillar wasn't there, I can actually see the product. And then the construction person would be like, that's a load bearing thing. If you that
Yeah.
If we could just move the H back, this would all work, right?
Well,
yeah.
That pillar like 6 inches to the right, and they're like, no, it's just. So I think pairing people with
so
very
awesome.
diverse experiences resulted in a much better product overall, because so much of the initial part of innovation is like understanding like different perspectives and understanding what you know, what you don't know, and asking a bunch of questions that gets us to that. So it's as I said, it's not a dumb question at all. We went through many iterations of this, and it's, we've lived it.
Yeah, Dilip, you're giving us flashbacks from our Store of the
Yeah,
Future
you are
days,
actually,
because it was so. I mean, it was so similar to the things that we encountered there, which was also a good opportunity as well for people who don't get to talk about. I mean, somebody on the properties team doesn't get to talk about innovation or thinking about cool new technologies or ways to shop, and so it does kind of bring ideas from so many perspectives that can. I mean, I can't think of how many things came up that we were like, oh yeah, that would be a great idea, but they just never had the format to share those kinds of opinions because they're in their track.
Well, and that's why Dilip was a clear OmniStar, because I think that's the important point here is this is such an interdisciplinary effort. I love the point Dilip brought up.
Without a doubt.
And if you think about it, I mean, you started in 2013, your first true store you built in 2000, I think it was 18, right? January of 2018.
2017 was when we launched in beta, like 2016
in beta, right?
December was when we launched in beta. 2018 Jan was when the first Go store opened.
Yeah, to public, right? And so like
public,
you're like 4 years, like you've been doing this for 4 years. Like that's early. Like that's not that much time yet. And so, that's why I think you've got to. It's incredible to think about where this can still go. In my mind, I don't know what you think about that.
2 of those years were a pandemic too, so it's kind of interesting.
Right.
Like there's like, it's like 4 years, but 2 had this little small thing known as the pandemic in the midst of it as well.
Right. Yeah. Absolutely. So is there a big surprise? What's the biggest surprise that you've had? And it could be about anything, about learning something about the way customers shopped. A challenge that you didn't expect engineering wise that you had to solve. Like, what's the biggest surprise you encountered over the last 4 years of trying to get this in market?
So I'll give you an example from Amazon One. Because we've been talking about Just Walk Out for a while. There's plenty of surprises and like Just Walk Out we've talked about some of those. Amazon One, are the early sort of the origin story of Amazon One is that when people said that we were trying to figure out ways and means that we had Just Walk Out stores opening. We knew that there's going to be a bunch of stores that are either going to have point of sale, but we're still finding plenty of places where people were standing in line, or there were things where wasn't the interaction wasn't seamless enough, and they were not necessarily candidates for just Walk Out stores. There were many other venues where that may or may not be possible, like entry into a stadium or paying, like, where there's a point of sale for concessions. There's a variety of places where Just Walk Out's not the answer necessarily, but Amazon. So, and we were thinking about a way that we could do, and the idea was that if you think about, there's a lot of things that we do on a regular basis, on a daily basis. All of us sort of show our identity in some way or the other. Like you have to sort of prove who you are in many things. Like you want to enter a garage, or you want to enter a stadium, or you want to pay for something in some shape or form. You're sort of like doing this. Am I Chris, and here's how I'm going to pay for it? And like, am I Chris, and do I have a ticket to be able to enter this destination? And in all of these cases, we were thinking that there's no common solution that exists out there. There's nothing that says that, like sometimes tickets are digital, sometimes they are paper printed, sometimes they are, sometimes like you have to show other forms of ID and like queues build up. And so the idea behind Amazon One was that, like, can we build like something that always started with the genesis of like, what is it that you always have on your person that would
Yeah.
allow you to be able to identify yourself and also complete these transactions? That was the question we posed ourselves. And believe it or not, at that time, there was a lot of work that was happening on the voice side in Amazon. There was a lot of stuff that was happening on, like the first thing that when people think about biometrics, they think about facial recognition. They think about these kinds of things. And
Right.
the early indicators said that, oh yeah, maybe you should use a combination of face and voice to be able to identify someone and to be able to pay. And on first blush, it actually sounds like a good idea. But the more we sort of dove into the specifics and the details of it, the more we realized that that's not really where we want to go. There was a strong hypothesis that we should probably do that because we had a lot of credibility on the voice side within Amazon. There was plenty of research, and the technology was at a point where facial recognition and other kinds of things would have been very good candidates for something like this. But then we sort of asked ourselves a few sets of questions to say that, well, what are we trying to do? Like, what should be? And in Amazon, one of the things that we do is that if we're ever confused about things like this, we write down tenets to indicate what should our guiding principles be for something that we're doing. Like it could be design tenets, it could be business tenets, whatever. In this case, what we said is, well, first of all, we wanted this to be whatever the biometric that we choose to use, we wanted it to be contactless. And not just because of COVID, this was even pre-COVID, because this wasn't a public device. This is going to be a public device. We didn't want anybody touching the device or whatever. And there's many biometrics, honestly, that merit contactless stuff. Like fingerprint is not really contactless, but
Right.
faces, voices, they're contactless biometrics.
Right.
The second thing that we wanted it to do is that, we are a core tenet for that is we started off with the fact that it needed to be private. Now, it's not just because it's biometrics. Like, what do you mean by private? Like, well, by private, what I meant is just looking at the biometric or hearing the biometric does not give you any clue as to the visual identity or the identity or the physical identity of the person. So looking at an image, looking at a picture actually does give me an identity. Even hearing voices gives you a reasonable identity as to the person. Like you can sort of narrow it down. So face and voice in that dimension are not as private as palm. Like looking at a picture of your palm doesn't necessarily give you any indication as to the visual identity or the physical identity of the person. Right. The third thing that we needed it to do is that we wanted it to be it needed to be an active biometric. And we wanted the user to always be in control. But that what I mean is the mere fact of you entering the room or saying something shouldn't trigger. This is why when you sort of look at a lot of these early versions of this, you had to look into the camera and you had to smile, or you had to do a thumbs up, or you had to do some other gesture, because just looking at the camera doesn't indicate intentionality. Like you can't infer intent to pay just because the camera. And by the way, when there's 6 people standing in line, the camera is actually looking at 4 faces. Right. So it's not just looking at the person in front, it's actually also looking at people behind you, like that you can sort of see. So we wanted the customer to always be in control and decide when and where. So like to your earlier question about like entry and other kinds of things, is that we wanted them to take a physical gesture and hover their palm over this device, but only choose to do so when they want to. Tomorrow, if you decided that I just wanted to pay by credit card, sure. I mean, there should be multiple options available. It should never be triggered automatically. It should be triggered only when you are deciding to be identified or you decide to pay. And then, so that was another reason that led us in this. And then the last one, which is always super important with any of this when you're doing identity or payment, is it needed to be accurate. Like, what's the point of a biometric? What's the point of an identity or payment thing that's just not going to be accurate? Right. So you look at face recognition, other kinds of stuff. Twins have very similar faces. They're like hard to identify. Palm doesn't have that. So this is why we went not just with palm, but also the vein structure underneath. So combining palm with the vein, that made it way more accurate than anything that existed. So like our original hypotheses for these things, if you sort of think about, would have led us down a very different path. down to say that like, well, we have expertise in the house for doing this, but it actually made our problem a lot more challenging. Like there's not a lot of data for Palm. There's not a lot of, research on Palm, and to be able to do that. But it seemed like it was the right customer experience. It seemed like if we could do this to the level of fidelity and the accuracy that we needed, it would adhere to all the design tenets that we had. And we were pleasantly surprised by how well and how easy it is to sign up and for people to use it. Because remember, they're signing up for this. There's not a lot of help. There's not a lot of guidance. You just need to be able to it needs to be simple and intuitive, and other people can grok it. And so if I look at the things that I myself might have had a bias for something, that we may have chosen something else just based on our own, the assets that we had and the amount of research that we had in some of the other areas, but we chose a very different path, which in retrospect now, given that we did all of this, proved to be way more useful and relevant.
Wow. Well, yeah. Well, got to see how the sausage was made there.
I know.
I'm so glad we asked that question.
Well, yes, very glad. Dilip, I think that Chris and I could sit here for like 25 hours with you and just ask question after question.
I literally could actually.
But I think that what the recurring thing that I'm hearing from you though is one of the reasons why your team are so brilliant at what you do is that you are never settling for this is the option to go with. You're coming up with the tenets that you talked about. You're challenging your hypotheses, even when they're good hypotheses. Like that's what you said when you said that about facial recognition and voice. Like that was a good solution at the time with the technology that was available. But you keep pushing the boundaries. You're not settling. And I want to take this time in our session to open this up to what we're calling our pay it forward section. I want to know who on the team is part of those decisions, of those constant, challenging of assumptions. Who do you want to single out today who's been particularly instrumental in your work? Those people on the ground who you love to share this recognition, this OmniStar award with?
It would be hard for me to single out a single person. But generally speaking, I think one of the things I take for granted sometimes, having been at Amazon for so long, is how much Amazon's process of invention and our approach towards it conditions you, that helps you along the way. There's a lot of companies that want to do invention, they want to do innovation, but they don't really have the patience for it. Mm-hmm. They don't have the single-threaded focus on it. Like I didn't really have any other responsibility. This was my only responsibility. It was like, go make this happen. So it wasn't as if they had saddled me with like 8 other different things and then said that, oh, by the way, this 9th thing, if you sort of get a little bit of time for it, try to figure out as to what you can do with it. And the problem is that we take, like one of the things that I find Amazon to do consistently well, despite having sort of been, from 2003 till now, is if they feel that this is a problem worth solving, if they feel that this is a big enough market segment size, if they feel that you can offer a differentiated way that customers will appreciate, then they give people single-threaded focus on the runway to do it. And I like, starting with Jeff and Andy now, and almost every leader that I've worked with, it is part and parcel of the DNA to be able to do that. So I feel like I am already 4 or 5 points to 10 in being part of an environment which sort of creates that the entire environment necessary for a level of innovation to come up. And then the idea that we sort of do with our teams is that 8 out of 10 of these ideas that we come up with are not going to work. And the 9th one is, going to be sort of working. And then the 10th one is we're slightly happier with it. And then you have to invent 11th and a 12th one. So one of the things that I always tell teams is that if you're in a worse position, if you're idea start, like don't be idea start, because it's unclear which one of these is going to get to the finish line. And so for us to be idea start is a much, much terrible problem to have than to be like, what are some of the ways that we can actually know whether these things are things that we want to double down on or we want to stop? Almost any idea that you see now, there have been about 10x the number that have been stopped And stop. We don't penalize people because their idea got stopped, because it could be for a wide variety of reasons that they don't really have any control over. So you have to also set up the incentive mechanisms that people don't only are conservative enough to only bet on the winners, because you don't know what those are.
Right.
You need to create that culture that some amount of failure in these ideas is okay. It's tolerated. And I love that about Amazon.
Yeah, I'm gonna start borrowing that too. I think I'm gonna call it get ideas on the board. You know, because you're right. I mean, I think back to my time in corporate America too. There were a lot of times ideas didn't go on the board. We were just going down one path, or
they were killed right away because of one thing or another.
Right. You wouldn't even get started. But yeah, get ideas on the board and then refine from there it's a really good thing to think about.
Yeah.
And I think we try to do that with OmniTalk. We're always trying to go, hey, what kind of content can we do next? Like, I mean, it's true in any business. So all right, man. Well, that was great. Like Ann said, I'm actually kind of sad this interview's over, but I really am. But that wraps us up. Dilip, Kumar from Amazon, thank you so much for being with us. Thank you for and we want to recognize you again as one of our top 20 OmniStars for 2022. Really appreciate you being here today.
Thank you so much for the opportunity. I love your work, as I said. Keep it up.
Thank you, man.
Thanks,
Thank you.
Dilip.
And to everyone listening, as always, thanks for tuning in and be careful out there.